Hello my friends, it's Tim, and I wanted to take you through a refactoring exercise based on what we've been doing in Lab 3. We've got some really interesting stuff going on in Lab 3. This is the first time that we're integrating Firebase. We are pulling data into what we call a connected component inside of React. And looking through the submissions, there was a lot of good submissions for me to look at, a lot of interesting work. But I came across one that was brought to my attention by Devin, which was submitted by Christopher. And Christopher is trying to implement a design that he came up with in one of his other classes. And I thought that was pretty cool. Really that's what you need to do to succeed in this program, is find ways of integrating together what you're learning in the different classes. So I thought it's worth taking a look at what he was trying to do and maybe doing a bit of a refactor, because I think there's a lot of things in there that all of you would be interested in. So maybe to start off with, I can just dive on in and bring up the lesson pen just to remind us of what we're doing here. Now this is not much to look at, but the whole idea is that you take what you've learned and figure out what could I do that's interesting with that. So what did we learn? Well, first off, we learned how to configure Firebase up top here. And then a little bit later on, when we go down to our data loader component down here, we see that we have the ability right down here to call this load data function. And because it's in this component did mount function, that is part of the component lifecycle, this will automatically get called as soon as this component is active and on screen, basically. Now, right down here in the load data, we see the first way that we are able to access Firebase. And so I've got a Firebase application set up just called project, and it is set to open so that anybody can access this to try out loading data from Firebase into a React component. However, Chris has not just done that. He's actually hooked up his own Firebase app, which has allowed him to customize everything and try and come up with this design that he's trying to do. So we're going to take a look at the original. We're going to look at some of the feedback given in Leaflet, and we'll just kind of go step by step to show how it goes from the original idea to the finished and fully working version. So let's do it. Okay, as a first step, I think what we should do is dive on into the feedback area here. So let's take a look, and we see in the initial submission here that Devin has weighed in with a few suggestions on the CSS side of things. When I first looked at this example, it was a bit hard to view because some of the items were basically appearing off stage. I couldn't actually see them on my smaller laptop screen. And some of the CSS fixes in there help to patch that up. So I'm going to grab those and I'm going to drop them in. But I'm not going to go into that too deeply. Maybe we'll be able to get Devin to talk about some of the work that she did on that. Instead, I'm going to go bring up the original submission from Chris here, because he saved a copy and forked it and saved it, which I think is really good, because showing the before and after a few steps of refactoring could be pretty useful. So this is what I originally got to see. And the thing that I like first of all is that Chris is helping me out here. He's actually put some good notes in here where he says he's trying to make a dynamic film showcasing application inspired by an assignment that he did for the UX class. Totally awesome. When you click on an image at the bottom of the page, it should display a bit of information on the page. So pretty straightforward. Pretty nice design, and you can see that we've got some placeholder content in here that is already showing up, but when I click on the navigation items, nothing is really happening. But there are some notes about that as well. If we go down a little bit, he's saying you still haven't really figured out how to handle toggling classes with on-click events. so we should show that. He went to the React documentation, he found some tips there, so he's got something going on, but it's not really doing what he wants it to do. As he says, it's pretty impractical for what I want to achieve. Okay, so let's scroll down through the code a little bit here and see if we can take note of some of the things that Chris is trying to accomplish here. So there's our action button that we made in class. Nothing different there. I will point out that you can see from the configuration object here that Chris is now pointing at a different Firebase app, which is awesome because that means he's also figured out the access controls of Firebase to open that up for loading from the public. So now we come down to the project render component, and in here you can see how he is getting results for a single individual movie here. But if we look into the code, we can sort of see that currently this component is only able to show the information about one movie. If we look carefully in our props here, we see props.data, and then we've got HTBG, which is seems like an abbreviation for the movie name. And that HTBG, that would be an object coming from Firebase. So looking at this, we can kind of assume that this is one of the objects coming from Firebase. So we'll probably want to take a look in the console, and when we do, we'll probably note that this is the movie information for a single movie. So currently, this component is kind of dynamic, but it can really only show the information for that one movie. So that's something we'll take a look at. Now, as we go down a little bit further here, this I really liked when I saw it, because this is Chris working on another component, which is called image rend. And I can tell you right off the bat, he's got the right idea here. If I just make this a little bit bigger up here, what he's trying to do is take this entire image area that is down below and turn that into a component. Now that's a smart thing to do. That's a very React thing to do, because this could be a very, very useful, very reusable type of component. So he's got the right idea, and it's really just a couple of implementation details that he needs some help with. And this is something that is good for everybody to know about. He mentions here that he sort of turned away from this approach that he was trying to do because he couldn't get the on-click event handling working the way that he wants. So let's see how he tried to implement the on-clicks. If we go down a little bit, we see a lot of stuff going on down in the data loader component here. So in the state, it looks like he's using some booleans to keep track of which of the movies is the currently selected one. And then he's got bindings for 5 click events, which corresponds with the number of movies that we're seeing here. So essentially, he's kind of found himself in a place where he's having to make a single click event for each movie that is rendering. So that's probably not what we want to do. I'm going to show you guys how we can replace all of these with a single click handler using something called a data attribute. That's something we haven't done yet, but it's extremely useful, and for something like this, it's really good to use. The other thing that we're going to look at is how to conditionally apply classes, because as we notice down here, we've got some really nice rollover effects happening in the CSS. And when we click, though, I expect to see this one highlighted and have the active state, and all of the other movies I expect for them to not be highlighted. And that sort of calls for conditional application of CSS classes. Basically, the one that's active should be getting the active class, and the other should be inactivated whenever they are not the one that is currently clicked on. I hope that makes sense. So we're going to get rid of all of these click handlers here. We are going to complete this little, custom custom component here that Chris is working on and show how we can make that happen. And then we're going to use some conditional rendering, and we're going to create one more component that will allow us to render each one of these thumbnail image tiles here. So we're basically going to create another component that is for one of the individual tiles. Then we're going to alter the component that is going into in order to render them all out based on the information that is coming from Firebase. So that sounds like a lot, but we'll do it in 2 stages. We'll do it the way that is a little bit easier first, and then if we go a little bit further, we can make it a way that is better dynamically, that will work with Firebase better. So that is kind of the assessment, and in this next little bit, we'll dive on in and we'll start doing a refactor piece by piece and talk about it as we go. Okay guys, step 1, I'm going to get on in there. I'm going to fork this project and do a little bit of messing around with the code. So let me jump over here. I'm going to create my fork first of all. So now I've got a nice copy that I can work with and make sure that Babel's still turned on. And the very first thing that I'm going to do, which I won't dwell on too much, but I'm basically going to grab the CSS recommendations from Devin and drop it in here just so that I can scroll this area down here. You'll notice that the viewable area I don't actually have a scroll bar for, so it's a little bit hard because the descriptions are getting tucked behind the navigation. So let me see if I can fix that up real quick. I'm going to dive back into Leaflet, and Devin's got a fork here. So let me jump in there, and I'm going to grab the CSS. So I'll just do a good old copy all, copy, because you can see I do have a scroll bar over here. So, you know, this might not be the be all and end all of what Chris is after, but this is going to help me out quite a lot as I'm developing here. So there we go. So let me jump back into here, and I'm just going to Control All, and I'm going to overwrite that CSS, and boom. So there we go. Now I can scroll, I can see the whole thing. So you may have to mess with the placement a little bit, but for the purpose of this demo, I think this is pretty good. I think ultimately Chris did take some of that CSS and then, you know, remixed some of it to get it how he wanted. But this will help quite a lot. So let's head on into the code here. And the first thing I'm going to do, let me clear up, you know, some of this stuff that doesn't need to be here anymore. So the old Firebase configuration that's pointed at my stuff, I'll get rid of that. Maybe I don't need this little note from class anymore, but I am going to keep Chris's notes because that's super helpful to me. And let's head on down to this component called Project Rend. Now, I'm tempted to rename it because what we're really doing is like rendering movie info here. It could maybe be like movie rend or something like that, but let's leave it alone for now. Taking a look in here, we mentioned in the intro that currently this component is not really fully dynamic. It kind of is. It can get information from Firebase, but the problem is that it's kind of hard-coded to be this one movie here. Now, I totally get that because you want to have something showing up on screen so you can see, you know, if it's starting to do what you want or not. But let's refactor this to make it a little bit more dynamic. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to go into where we're accessing the props here. And what I'm going to do is going to break this just for a little bit, but in a minute, you'll see why this approach is a little bit better here. So I'm going to get rid of this information right here, and I'm going to replace what we're looking for in the props with some other variables. So I'm going to make this one called current title. And before I go any further, guys, one more little tip that I want to show you, which has to do with CodePen itself, is if you are working with live data like this from Firebase, you can run into crashes if you don't do this step that I want to show you, Right now, the live reload, that automatic refreshing, can be pretty problematic because we're hitting the database basically every single time that we make a change here. So instead, if you go into settings, you can click on behavior here, and you can actually disable the auto updating. Now this can really save you because otherwise, you might get into like an eternal loop or something that you can't get out of that crashes your pen. So I'm going to make that change, save and close. And when I do, you'll notice that I get this run button up at the top. So basically now whenever I want to refresh the thing, I'm going to hit that run button and it's going to run it from the top. So let me work my way through here, and I'm removing the areas that are hard-coded, and I'm renaming the variable. Now these variables don't exist yet, but we're going to make them. And I'm going to call it current, just so I know which ones I replaced. So I'll do the same thing here, and I'm going to make it current description. So as I'm doing this, I can sort of comment on why I'm doing it this way. It's all about the reusability of this component, right? I mean, ideally, current genre, ideally this thing would have very little idea of what it's doing. It's rendering movies, but as far as it's concerned, it should basically just be rendering some data here. It shouldn't know very much about the movies. All it should know is it's getting these properties and it needs to render them. And we apply some classes. So again, I'll update this one and I'll say current director. This is going to become current rating. Current rating, there we go. And like you might expect, it's going to be current background. That's the one that is showing that nice full-size image in the background here. Okay, so there we go. Right. Now what we've created is a very generic component, but that's good because a generic component, or a dumb component as it's called, is one that is very reusable. That's what we're after here. So now if I hit the run, you are going to see that this kind of breaks for the moment. But what I want to do in the next step is demonstrate that this is a functional component. I'm going to not necessarily work with the database right off the bat. What I like to do is put in some data just locally by putting it directly in the state. That allows me to see that this thing is getting its information from the state. Let me show you what I mean. It's a little easier if we go down and implement some changes here. So here we are down in the data loader. I'm going to make some fairly extensive changes down here. First off, I'm going to get rid of this toggling because we're going to look in a better way of doing that. So maybe I can just kind of strip that out of there. And instead, I'm going to put in some placeholder values just to prove that the component that I just updated is working. So we had a value called current title. We had another one called current year, which I'll make 2017. We are living in the glorious year 2017 here. Current description, which I think we just called it current desk. We'll double check that, but I'll throw a bit of lorem ipsum to the gypsum, anything, whatever, bum, bum, bum. Basically, we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on this placeholder because very shortly it's going to be replaced with the real data coming from the database. What else did we have? We had the current genre, and that I'm going to say like a film noir. There we go, classic stuff. Current director. So this is going to be a film by Tim Bott. He's not that well known, but he's up and coming. And then we need a background. So I'll just grab any kind of current background image. Let me get like a nice image off the internet's Lord of the Rings is always good. Let's check for images. And we'll pick out, this looks pretty good to me. So let me just borrow this. I'll hot link to it for now, but it's not going to stay in there, so this shouldn't cause the site owner too much trouble. There we go. Close that up, and here we are back in here. Let me throw that URL in the current background, just like that. And this is some pretty good starting data to work with. Now the thing is, the reason why it's not showing up yet is because we've placed this in the state of this data loader, which is what we call the connected component or the smart component. And currently it's only staying in the state. We need a way of getting that information from the state of this parent component into the child component, which is called currently Project Rend up here. So to do that, we can do that inside of the props. So let's look down. There should be a render function in here. We'll leave those handle clicks alone for now. Right in here, yeah, here we go. So we've got this Project Rend right here. And after that, we see where Chris has, moved his navigation into here because he wanted to be able to apply these on clicks to the individual click handlers that he's created. We're going to get rid of all of that. That's all going to go. That's all, we're going to implement the thing that Chris originally wanted to do. But for the moment, we're looking at this Project Rend here. So we're going to have to make a small change to that. And instead of passing one data chunk like this, we're going to pass in the individual components from the state. So it's going to make this look a little bit bigger because it's going to have more attributes. But as we do this, you're going to see that component kind of spring to life here. Okay, so let's leave the data alone. You never know, we might be able to use that. But now we're going to create individual properties that match the state. So in here, to access the state in this component, we're going to say this dot state dot current title, just like that. And we'll do the same for basically all of the props that we are trying to access inside of this other component here called Project Rend. So we've got current title, current year, current description, current genre. We're going to pass all of these in as attributes. So let's get busy down here. So we had our current title, we have our current year equals, and then the curly braces, this allows us to run a little bit of JavaScript in here. And the JavaScript we're running is basically just looking up a variable. And where are we looking it up from? We're looking it up from state, which off the bat is set in the constructor, right? So all these values we're going to be passing in, and those will be accessible as props. So we've got our current year, we've got current description equals, again, this dot state dot current description, and no magic to this part. Current genre, it actually seems almost too simple. This dot state dot current genre, which I never type right. Current director. Now you'll notice I'm delimiting these. I don't know if that's the right word. I'm putting a space in between each of these guys. Just like any attribute in HTML, that's how it knows the difference between them. So here we are on current director, and this dot state dot current director. Pretty soon this is going to be up and working. Current background equals, you guess it, this dot state dot current background. Okay. Are we missing anything? The current rating. We need the current rating. Current rating equals, and it's going to be this dot state dot current rating. All right. So I think that the information that we are setting by default up here in the state should be showing up in that component. Let me bring up my console here and see if I can get a hint on why it is not. Let me give it a quick, after talking about that, I forgot that my live reload is off, so I have to actually click the run button now, which is a good thing when we're working with live data. And as you can see, this is basically functional. There's my title, my year, there's me. There are some things not showing up. I might have a typo in the name of my variable. But the main point here, guys, is that we took this component, the project rend, that was, kind of hard-coded to a single value, and we've now turned it into a more general component that can receive data and render that data. And it's working pretty good here. Maybe we can just double check some of our values here and also double check the console. Doesn't look like anything too crazy out of the ordinary here inside of the console. So I think we're pretty good on that front. Let me see if I've got everything. So current title, looks like that's showing up. Current year, that's showing up. Current description. Oh, you know what? We have a typo. We called that current desk, like that. We didn't want to have to type the full description. So let's give that a go. Great, there's our description. And now I think we pretty much have everything. The background is rendering. We don't see a rating, but I think that's probably because we don't actually have a current rating property in here. I'll do something really simple just to get that showing up. Current rating, 5 of 10. Reviewers have not been kind to Timbot's film noir version of Lord of the Rings. All right. Okay, looking good. Hey, and look at that. It's even picking up the styles that we need inside of here. Okay, so, this is obviously not the final version of what we want here, but is a big improvement in terms of refactoring the code. So we're going to move on from that point, and now that we've got that showing in a basic manner, we're going to dive into the code and we're going to do a little bit more work inside this data loader here. And then we also want to use this code up here that's been kind of commented out, because I feel like that really is the right approach to handling the navigation area that we see down in here. We still don't have our, management of state in terms of which one of these should be active. And we also don't see the information updating in the background here. That's what we're going to do next. So stick with me. Step 2 is coming up. Okay, guys, we're moving along pretty nicely on this pretty slick little MovieSite. And so what we did in the last chunk was we basically refactored the project rend component to make it dynamic. Then we put some dummy values, just some hard-coded stuff, inside the state object of the parent component, which is our data loader. as soon as we did that, we changed our attributes on the project rend to put those new dummy values into the props of the project rend. Let's take a quick look at that just so we can see what I'm talking about. And right down here, so here's the state object, right? And then inside of our proj rend, in the render function down here, so basically where we implement our other component, we are essentially giving props for each one of those values to that secondary component, the child component here called proj rend. And that matches up, if we go back up to the project rend component, that matches up right here. You can see that each of those variables are named exactly the same. So we're taking the information from the props of the parent component, or sorry, from the state of the parent component, and we're passing it into the props of the child component. In a nutshell, that's what we're doing. Now that means that this proj rend component can change just based on changes in the state at the parent level. We're going to prove that right now. So let's see if we can make one update that will get rid of this background stuff and and get actual data showing from the Firebase database. So if we want to see what's coming from the Firebase database, I think we've got a console log here. If I open up this object, you can see, there's our data. And so we've basically got a key for each of the movies. So one's called Stalker, Das Boot, HDBG, which is the one I think we want to default to. Let's see if we can get HTBG, the movie, showing up instead of our placeholder. Now, if I expand this down a little bit, you can see that yes, it's got a background, a description, director, genre, rating, title, year, all the stuff that we need. So watch with me here as we do this. While we're at it, we're also going to clear up the click handling. I really feel like the click handling is what caused this to be a little bit tricky in here. And Chris even mentioned in his comment, like this, having all these separate click handlers is not the way that he wants to handle it. So I'm going to start off with a little bit of radical action here. I'm going to go in and I'm actually going to strip out all of these click handlers to leave just one. So if we've got only one click handler, well, that handler is going to need a way of knowing which movie that we're clicking on. So that calls for a parameter. So inside of the handle click, I'm going to give it a parameter. I'm going to call that parameter ID. Now, we're going to have to do a little bit of work in here, but it's fairly straightforward work. First thing, why don't we get a little console log action going on here? Changing movie to, and we'll just say the ID that we're changing it to. So what are these IDs going to be? Well, if we look in the console again, the IDs are going to be these keys right here. We're going to use that because if we have that, we get access to all the other information that we need about that movie. All right? That's the idea. Let's see how we can implement it. So we're going to change a little bit how this set state is happening. We don't really need this toggle stuff anymore. So let me get rid of some of that stuff. We can simplify this out a bit. All right, so now we've got a pretty simple set state. The first thing I'm going to do is make a variable called current nav item. And I'm just going to use this to keep track of what is the current ID, the current movie that you have clicked on. Why does that look a little weird? I know why that looks weird. Because I need to put all of this inside of an object. So let me make some curly braces, turn this into an object. And now I'll say current nav item. That looks more like what I want. And, in the state, remember whatever the current movie is that we're looking at. So that's going to get that job done. And then all I have to do is go through here, assigning values to each of those variables that we're passing into the props of the renderer. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go look in the state. Now this may look a little strange because we're actually setting state here, but until this completes firing, we can still look in the state and it won't really have any changes until that set state is done. So in here, we can say, okay, look at the state as it is right now. And if you'll remember, we have a data property in there. Well, where's that data property coming from? Let's go down a little bit just to remind ourselves that the load data is setting that, right? Here's where we're loading data, and when we get that data from Firebase, we're immediately calling setState to create this data object, and that is the data that is coming from Firebase. So back up here, when we're handling our click, we can totally look in that data object and get what we need out of it. So how we're going to access that? Well, we're going to say go to the data, look up the ID, which is, again, if we remind ourselves from the console, it's going to be something like, there's our data object. So inside, any of these keys can be the ID. So for instance, if we pass in HTBG, well, now we'll be able to go inside of that and get properties like background, description, director, genre, and so forth. Now, as soon as we do, the magic of React is, because we're calling set state on this, React is going to look and see, whoa, some of that state data has changed now. It's then going to go to any of the attributes that are being passed into as props to the child component and refresh them. Okay? We're going to revisit that idea, but let that sink in a little bit. It basically means that as soon as we call set state, any of the child components that need to change will just automatically and very efficiently update themselves. Let's keep going. You're going to see this spring to life in a second here. So back in here, we're going to say go into the data, look up the current ID, the key, and we're setting the title. There we go. Now we can do the same for every single one of these variables. So we had our current description. We're going to set again to this.state.data, look up the ID, and it's going to be like DESC is description. Then, so we basically just keep going like this. Let's get the background. This.state.data, go to the ID and get the background. We're going to set the current director to this.state.data. I'm going to go a little fast here because, there really is no tricks to this part of it. Director, current genre, this.state.data ID, genre. What else we got? Current rating. Current rating is this.state.data. Look it up with the ID and give me the rating. The variables over here, I'm basically getting by looking in the console. I don't have access to Chris's Firebase account, so I have to do a little bit of snooping to figure out what those are. But I worked along with Chris a bit and got him to, normalize it, which basically means, making sure that all the objects have values for these properties. And that right there fixed up a whole bunch of problems. Data, ID, and we need the year. Okay, so this is ready to go if we have a way of calling this handle click and giving it an ID. I want to test and make sure that this is actually working. So here's what I'm going to suggest. Let's fake it. Let's fake a mouse click on the part of our user. Now while we're here, we really only need this original handle click. These other guys, these ones that are like hard-coded per movie, we can get rid of all these guys now. So this is starting to get much more efficient. This is looking molto bene here. All right, so get rid of some of this stuff, just fix up our spacing a little bit. That's all looking pretty nice. The renderer, we can pretty much leave that alone for the moment. I'm gonna pop on down to where we first load in the data, okay? So this component did mount, that's part of the life cycle. It's gonna get called automatically when our component shows up on the screen. That's gonna reach out and say, hey, load the data. Firebase is gonna do its thing. We're gonna get this snapshot of data back, and we're gonna call set state, which will populate that data object. So our click handler, it's ready to go now. There's nothing to stop us from manually calling it here. So why don't we do it? We can test this right away and see if this works. I'm going to put one conditional in here. I'll say if there's no current nav item. So here's what I mean. Look into this.state, so the state object, and see, is there a current nav item? So where am I, getting this current nav item from? Well, it's actually assigned inside of the handle click here. Right here, we're making a variable called current nav item, and we're giving it the value of the ID that gets passed when we call this handle click. So when the data first loads, that current nav item, it isn't in the state yet, so it doesn't actually exist. So this little conditional that we're creating here is a little protection for ourselves to basically say, only call this one time based on the navigation not having been clicked yet, okay? So calling our handle click is, just like calling any other function. So I say handle click, and I'm going to give it one of our values, like HTBG. Again, where am I getting that from? Where is this ID? Well, if we look in the console again, we take a look at our object. There's our data object, and each one of these are now valid IDs that can be passed to the handle click function. That's why we don't need multiple click functions anymore. We can have just one that receives an ID that should be used to set the information in the state, and that will automatically cause all the child components to refresh with what they need. I think this is going to work, so let's give it a test. I'll close up my console. This is looking pretty nice to me. Let's try and give it a run. Boom! Yes! Look at that. That is working, and that is pretty darn minty right there. So I would say that our component for rendering the movie information is in great shape. We've got a click handler that's ready to go. In the next step, there's a couple ways that we could approach this. So we could go into this area right here, the M drawer that is inside of our data loader. But if we keep that inside of there, it is kind of against best practices for React. Smart components are connected components. They're really not supposed to do much rendering of HTML themselves. They can, And originally people used to do it all that way, but it sort of breaks the idea of a component, which is reuse. Right now, well, we've called this component data loader, but it's not just loading data, is it? It's also doing this rendering down here. So, we'd kind of have to rename our component like data load and render navigation component or something like that. If we're really describing what it does and it's getting that wordy, we should probably break it up. And this is why I say Chris had the right idea, because when I go up here, I can see that he was doing that very thing. And the only thing that kind of, stood in his way was that click handling. So we're going to see how we can make this an effective component, give it code that will allow it to call the click handler of the parent component, which is our data loader. That's what's up next. Stay tuned for part 3. Okay guys, this is getting pretty good. In the last little chunk of this tutorial, we refactored click handling, and we got rid of a bunch of click handlers and simplified things down to one. Let's take another quick look at that area. Just scroll down here just as a reminder. So we got rid of all that handle click 2, handle click 3, and so forth, and we replaced that with a single click handler that gets an ID. Now that we've done that, we're able to create inside of the state object of the component this little variable called current nav item. This is going to wind up being very important for the next step that we're going to do here. So now that we've got this rendering area working out okay down here, let's revisit this navigation. Now we wanted to turn this into its own component because this is, pretty nice navigation component. I probably want to use this a lot. So let's take a quick look at the area where Chris was trying to make that happen. And let's bring it back again. So he was creating this image run component, and you can see that it's receiving its props. It's using an arrow function, just like we expect for a component. So let me uncomment this guy. And uncomment this down here. That's great. Now looking inside, we can see that this has some pretty nice JSX in here. We've got a outer div for each of the items with an image inside, and good show here. When we're applying classes for CSS purposes inside of JSX, we can't just say class equals. We have to use the term class name. Now the reason why is because technically this JSX stuff, while it looks like HTML, is not actually real HTML. And the word class is reserved in JavaScript. We can see we're using it down here to create our class-based component. So if we were just saying class inside of here, JavaScript gets confused. So instead, we've got the ability to apply classes by saying class name. So looking at the first one here, we can see that we're applying two classes, one called mcont, which I think is probably sizing stuff, but we've also got this class called mActive. Now that class is what is causing one of the navigation items to show as active, and our little highlight on the top here sticks around on the one that is active. Now, we're not currently employing this component, so we don't really see any of these becoming active, but we're going to change that because this is a really nice piece of code and I'd like to be able to use it. So before we do that, I want to talk about planning your component a little bit. When you start to create a component like this navigation area, you sort of have to sit back and treat it like its own little application, because it should be. If this thing is going to be reusable, it needs to get everything it needs to do its job from the props, and that's all it should know about. It doesn't know anything about the rest of this application. So looking at our navigation bar that we've got down here, what does it need to do its job? Well, it basically needs to know which is the current nav item. If it knows that, we can use a technique called conditional class rendering in order to make the current navigation item the one that is active, the one that has the mActive class that we're talking about here. That's the idea. Now, fortunately, the parent component, our data loader, does now have in its state a current nav item that keeps track of which is the currently clicked movie, the one that is being rendered by our ProjRend component up here. So all it really needs to do is give that information to our navigation component down here, and then we should be able to make code that'll make the currently active movie be the one that is highlighted. So that's the data loader passing that information into its child component, the navigation. There's another thing that has to happen. Our child component of the navigation is the one that is going to actually have the click handler applied to it. But the function that actually needs to get called is up here in its parent, the data loader. It's this one, the handle click. But we learned a technique for doing that in Lab 2. We're actually going to pass a reference to this function in as a prop to the child, the navigation. So navigation really needs a couple of things. It needs to know which is the current nav item, and it needs to know a callback that it should call when a click happens. Let's get busy. So we've uncommented the piece of code up here. We're going to get this chunk of code here showing up on screen right away. I'm going to go down to the data loader, which currently has this JSX right down inside of here for the M drawer, and I'm going to strip out everything from inside of it here. So let me just make sure that I'm getting exactly what I need. So div, 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 div. I'm going to take all these guys out of here. Boom, just like that. It's looking simpler already. And instead, I'm going to put in that image rend component, just like that. Now, I think we probably should see something show up if we run it right now. Uh-oh. Did I get a bug? Cannot read property desk. Do a quick save here. What am I missing? I might not have done everything I need to do yet inside that image rend. Right, so this has props inside of here. So this currently isn't working, but we're about to make it work. So let's go down to where we are embedding this in our data loader. So we're looking at the renderer here. Renderer, right here. So here's image rend. Let's start off by giving this component props that it needs to do its job. So here's what I'm talking about. Just give me a second here. I want to make sure I don't miss anything. Right, okay, so we said that one of the things this guy's going to need is a function. It needs to know about what function should get called inside this parent component when clicks happen. So I'm going to give it a property that I will call click callback. Okay, you can call it anything that you want, but that's what I'm going to call it. And I'm going to point it at this dot handle click. So where am I getting that handle click from? Well, when I see the keyword this, I know it's inside of this class. And if I look up, there it is. It is the function that we created in the last little section there. So the child now, the image rend component, is going to know about that callback. It's probably looking a little bit familiar from Lab 2 that we did. Okay, what else do we need here? Well, we said that it's going to need to know about the current nav item as well. We need that information so we know which of the tiles is the currently active one, and we can, make it go to its active state. So I'm going to say current nav item equals, and I'll say this dot state dot current nav item, because we put it in the state. We put something else in the state as well, which was the data object. Why don't we give it that as well? We'll say data equals this dot state dot data, just like that. And yeah, I feel like that is going to get us where we need to go. Okay, so image rend is going to get a callback function. It's going to know which is the ID of the current nav item, and it's going to know about all the data. So things like the images and so forth that we need to use. So let's head on up again to our current iteration of the image rend component here. All right. And we're going to refactor this a little bit. Let's get down to it. Alrighty. Okay, so first of all, I want to change the way that these divs are being done up here. This is going to give us an opportunity to show something called conditional classes. What I mean is this. Even though this looks like HTML, we know that technically it's JSX, and JSX allows us to insert JavaScript anywhere that we want. This is good because using JavaScript, we can do a little if statement to see if, for instance, this first item is the active one. Let me show you how it works. I'm going to use a little something called a ternary operator, which is a little piece of logic that you may or may not have tried yet. But let me do it, and I'll talk you through it. So I'm going to leave in the mcont class, because that's just sizing stuff. They all need this. But right after that, notice what I'm going to do. I'm going to put some curly braces right around the area where we are creating our class names. That's going to allow me to run JavaScript inside of here. And that JavaScript is basically going to wind up in creating a string that includes any of the class names that I need. So I'm doing some basic string concatenation here. So here's my little string for the first name that I want. Now I'm going to add a plus, and I'm going to use the props just like this. I'm going to look in the current nav item property that we gave it, and I'm going to say, if this is equal to, for instance, das Boot, then, and this is what I call what I referred to as the ternary operator. That little question mark means then. So this is a way of us doing some logic, like an if statement, very concisely. And it's kind of nice when you're inserting JavaScript into your JSX like this, because you don't have to do a lot of line breaks. You can apply your logic all in one line. So here's how it works. I'm saying if the props.currentNavItem is das Boot, then return mActive, right? Then I can put a little colon, which is the equivalent of an else. Return mActive. inactive. Okay? So the end result here is that we're saying if the current nav item that we got out of the props is equal to .boot, add mActive to the class names. If it isn't, add inactive to the class names. This is a super, super useful technique. This is what allows us to conditionally apply classes. Now, since there can only ever be one current nav item, only one of these is going to get the active state. Pretty good, right? So I can take this little trick and I can duplicate it across all of our navigation items here. So let me copy this. And I'm going to stick it right in here. Control V. Except in this case, it's not going to be DOSBoot. I'm going to say Stalker. And then I will do the same down here. And what's this going to be? This is going to be 7 Samurai. Just like that. Replace this one. Just like that. And I'm going to say HTBG, Hard to Be a God. BG, it sounds like an interesting movie. I want to check that one out. I hope it's a real movie. Does it sound pretty interesting? All right. Then down here, what do we need? This one is going to be LH, basically. I forget what that one stands for, but we'll know soon enough. Okay, great. It's looking pretty good. Yup. Let me give this a run. Let's see what we got. I feel like we're in a pretty decent place here. Give it a run. Okay. Now as I scroll down, wow, how did that guy get pushed down? Oh, I know how this guy got pushed down. I know exactly how that happened. There's a bit of CSS at work here. See how this is all inside of a div ID called mDrawer? But if I go back to my data loader, and I take a little look in the renderer, here's another div ID mDrawer. So I'm guessing that mDrawer is what is causing the spacing to push the navigation down. And so it's basically getting pushed down twice. So let me get rid of that div right here. I'll get rid of that one. Now React isn't going to have a problem with that because even though I have two components in here now that are adjacent, they are wrapped inside a single div. So we're not breaking that adjacency rule that React seems to be pretty adamant about. Okay, let's see if that fixes up our spacing, and hopefully that returns our thunder. Let's take a look. Nice. All right, look what's going on here, guys. He's highlighted. Is he the right one? Yes, he is. And why is he highlighted? Well, because we basically simulated a person clicking on that one as soon as the data is loaded. And when that happens, both this component that's rendering the page gets the data that it needs, and our navigation component now gets the data that it needs. One of the items of data that it needs is to know which nav item is active. I think this thing's working. Oh, not yet. Okay, do you know what I'm missing? Do you know? So we're using the information from the props about which of these is active, but we got another piece of information that's vital, which is a callback, the click handler that's in the data loader. Now, why do we need that function to be in the data loader? Well, the reason why is because when the information about the click occurs, it's the data loader that needs to change its state. In particular, it needs to update the current nav item information. Why? Well, because as soon as that set state is called and that value changes, this triggers React to refresh any of the children components, including our navigation item, but also including our other component, which is the movie renderer that we see in the background there. You see how this goes? It takes a little getting used to, but once you get used to it, man, you will be flying along and making some really interesting stuff. So we need to do our second part of things, which is the click handling. Now that's going to allow me to show you another little trick we can do here, which is called a data attribute. So let me go back up into our image renderer here, and I'm going to start adding some click handlers. Now just before I do, let me make a basic little handler function inside of my image renderer. Okay, so it's going to look like this. I'm going to say const, and I'll call this click handler equals, and we can receive the event about what was clicked. And we're going to make our little fat arrow function just like that. Okay, and maybe to start off with, I can just do a little console log here, and I'll say event target, just like that. Give that a run, and I'm going to open up my console. We'll try some clicks to see what's what. So here's our console. Let me clear that out, and I'm going to scroll down. Hopefully I can get in here. There we go. And some clicks. Okay, nothing yet, but that's because we haven't actually told each of our elements here about the click handler. So let's get that sorted out first of all here. So I'm going to go to my first item here, and I'll say onClick equals, and we just give it that click handler that we just made. So nothing crazy there. We're just applying a click listener, and when it happens, we're going to call click handler, which is our function right here. Give it a run, and I'll try some clicking again. Now I think we have applied that to das Boot, which I know from the picture is this one right over here. And look at this, guys. We saw, whoa, we saw it recognize, wow, what's going on? Oh, when I hover over it in the inspector here, the developer tools is showing me its preview of the image that is in the image field there. That's funny. But you get the idea, right? We've now got a valid click handler that knows, which particular image element was clicked on. So let's add it to the rest here. So this is all going to be very straightforward. We're just going to add the same click handler to each one of these guys. Maybe I can copy and paste. OnClick, 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 just like that. Okay, now what's going to happen currently is, like, if I run it, I can click on any of them, and clicking, clicking, clicking. But the handler here doesn't really know the difference. All it really knows is that you clicked on something, and it knows that I clicked on an image. Now the image does have a different source attribute, so I can maybe use that to tell them apart, but I'm going to show you much, much better way that our click handler can know which particular image that you clicked on. It's going to look like this. I'm going to go into the image, and I'm going to add an attribute starting with the word data. So I'm going to say data-id equals, and I'm going to give this a unique ID, das Boot. Now why am I giving it that ID in particular? Well, it's because, right here, I can see that this is the das Boot tile. Now if I do the same for each of the images, in a second, I'm going to show you how we can use that information in our handler. So yeah, let me go to my second image here. Boom, and what's this guy? This guy is Stalker, just like that. And I'll put another one in here, and this one's the 7 Samurai. So each of these are getting a unique ID, basically. And this one will be the HTBG, and this one, you can guess, is going to be LH, which I forget what that one stands for. Okay, so back up in our click handler here, look what we can do. I'm going to log event.target, but then I'm going to say, look into data set, right? So data set you might not have worked with before, but it is extremely useful. I'm surprised I don't see it used more. Basically, when we add the word data to the beginning of an attribute, any attribute that we preface with the word data goes into this object called data set that is automatically applied to the target. So this is a great way for us to pass information between the item that is clicked and the handler. And in this case, what I want, here's how we access it. We just take the data dash off the beginning and we say, look at the ID. Awesome trick, awesome trick. So let's try this again. Let's try some more clicks. And we're going to see this output in the console is a little bit different here. So clicking on Samurai. Boom! You know, right there we got our ID. Click on this, HTBG. Click on this is LH. Click on this, Das Boot. You know, this is all very good because it means that this click handler here, this is the secret sauce. This is why we can have a single click handler. There's only one more thing we need to do, which is to pass this information along from our subcomponent, the navigation, to the data component. We have to do that because it's the data component who has the job of keeping track of which is the currently selected nav item. Now, if we click, it needs to know that that change is going to happen. This is where we use the callback that we passed into the props of our navigation here. Exact same as we did in Lab 2, but now you can see how useful this technique is. It's going to look like this. Let me go to the props, and I'm going to call click callback, and I'm going to give it that ID, event target data set ID, just like that. And we'll probably go back and remove our console, but we'll keep it in now, for now, just for debugging purposes. So where's this click callback coming from? Well, let's go back to our data component. There's our data loader. And we go to the renderer right here, where we're actually using our image rend component. And look at that, click callback. And what does it equal? Well, it equals the handle click function in this class right there. So what's the end result here? Well, let's follow it through. When we click on one of our tiles here, the onClick is going to call the click handler, which will get the ID of the tile that we clicked from the data ID right here. It's then going to look in its props, get that callback function, which is pointed at the click handler of the data loader, and give it that ID. Okay, so now suddenly the parent component, our data loader, is aware of what item was clicked in the navigation. It can update its state, and everything magically refreshes. I'm feeling pretty good about this. I'm going to give this a save, and we're going to give this a try. I'm feeling fairly confident. Let me hit the run. Okay. And let's try Das Boot. Das Boot. Boom! Oh my God. Do you see what's going on here? Like, this is perfect. this is totally working. So there's our .boot, there's our description, everything is there. The navigation knows that .boot is now the active element. Let me try the second one. Boom, perfect, perfect. So what have we done here? Well, we've basically now got two independent components. One is rendering the movie information. The other one is handling navigation. Those two components know nothing about each other. That's good. But they both know about their parent, which is the data loader. The data loader itself isn't doing anything visual. It's not doing any of the rendering whatsoever. Its job is just to keep track of the data. There's two ways it does that. It gets data from Firebase, which is our live data. It gets information about what you've clicked on. And with those two things, all it does is pass the information along through the props to the child components, who then can do their thing. Beautiful. Now, if we want, let's say we end up building out a full website or application based on this, we may find that our movie renderer becomes super useful to us in lots of places. That navigation, I'm relatively certain, would be very useful to us. And we can simply pluck it out of where it is and compose it with a different connected component. And as long as that component passes through the props the information that our presentational components need to do their job, they'll just work. This is the beauty of React. So really, really nice example. I'm wondering if you've been following along so far, could I show you how to take this to the next level? Okay. If you were watching carefully while we were doing this, you might have noticed a potential flaw inside of here. It's inside of the image rend. Now, first off, well, there's two things we could probably work on here. First off, we've got a lot of repetition going on, right? We've got this div repeated. A better thing for us to do would be to make yet another component that represents each of these individual tiles here. Each one of these can be a little component. Can you imagine a situation where you might want to be able to use a single one of these somewhere else? I can definitely picture that. Wouldn't be that hard for us to do. The other thing that is potentially a problem here is that we've still got some hard-coded data. Right here in the props, we're looking in the data object, and this right here, this property .boot and stalker and 7 samurai and so forth, you know, that's hard-coded data. So that is going to kind of limit our use of this navigation because it's going to be expecting those specific movies. It is entirely possible in a couple of steps for us to make this navigation 100% reusable and completely dynamic. Now, if we do that, it means that if new movies get added into Firebase, they'll automatically show up in the navigation. If anything about the existing movies is changed, it'll automatically be refreshed in the navigation. So this is a pretty powerful technique and probably something that we want to do. You could call it a day with what we have right now, but I'd love to show you how to take it to the next level. To do it, we'll use something called object keys, and we'll use a map function. Again, we have had a brief introduction to this in a simple way in Lab 2 when we created our simple announcement list. This is the exact same technique, just used with a little bit more sophistication, but I bet you can wrap your head around it. Let's give it a try. Okay guys, congratulations if you've stuck with me this far. Hopefully you can watch the previous sections a couple of times and some of this will start to make a little bit more sense to you. Basically, we've created an architecture where we have this component that shows information about movies, and we have the separate navigation component, and those are both children of this data loader component. Now, as information changes in the data loader component, that gets passed as props into the child components, which then refresh, and so the view changes. We see in the navigation things like highlighting on the currently active movie, and the page renderer, we basically see the background change and the description change and the title and so forth. Because these, even though these components work completely separately, they're both listening to changes in the data from their parent. That's basically the way that React works. Now, in the last time we were looking at this, we said that it's still not perfect. And the reason why is because right here, our image rend component is still a bit static. For instance, it's kind of hard-coded to these specific movies that we have in the database. And, you know, that's not the best. What if we add more movies? What if we remove some or change some? Is there a way that we can make this a little bit more dynamic? The answer is yes. We need to do it in 2 steps. First off, when we see repetition, like we see among these divs right here, we should really think about turning that into its own separate component. So we're going to start off making a custom component that will be for each one of our little movie tiles down here. Let's stub it out. Now before I do that, I'm going to actually make a little change to the name of this image rend component. I'm going to make it a little bit more accurate because this isn't a single image. Instead, I'm going to call it the image nav rend. And if I make the change to the name of the component up here, I'm also going to have to change it in the renderer in the data loader. So let's look for that. There we go. So image rend is now becoming image nav rend, which is maybe a little more accurate because this is a whole navigation we're talking about, not just a single image. Now the reason I'm making that distinction now is because I am actually going to make a component for a single image. So let me head on up there and let's start simply and see if we can make this happen. So new component here. So this one, I'm going to call, I probably am going to call this one image rend, img rend. Const image rend, just like that. And just like we do with all of our functional components, we're going to give it the props, arrow function, curly brace, and now we're into it. So we mentioned in the last segment, when we're making a new component, we really have to bust it down to the basics and say, well, you know, what is this component going to need in order to do its job? Well, for this guy, let's put a little note. What's he expect? Well, he's going to need a few things. He's going to need to know the background image. You know, if we're going to render this little thumbnail tile, it's going to need to know what to use as its image. So that's one thing for sure. Now, when we click on this individual tile, it's going to need to know a function that should handle that click. So we're going to need something like a click callback. And then the last thing that we're going to need is the ID used for this individual tile, right? So picture it. We've got our individual tile. It renders its background image. When we click, it's going to call a function and give that function the ID. So for each of these individual thumbnail images to do their job, they need those 3 things. Where are they going to get those 3 things? Well, there's only one place that a component can get its requirements from, which is the props. Okay? So how do we get things into the props? Well, we've seen a few times now, we use attributes to put items into the props. So you could expect we're probably going to need to do a little bit of an update to our image nav rend. We'll get to that. In the meantime, let's flesh out this little image rend component. So we know it's going to need click handling. So why don't we put that in right now? So we'll give it a click handler equals, and we'll get the click handle, the click event, arrow function, and now we can handle it in there. So why don't we throw a little console log action in here to start with. So we're going to say image rend sees a click, just like that. That's going to be our click handler. Let's get into its rendering. So just like we do with all of our presentational components, we're going to put the JSX in a return. Just like this. And inside of here, I basically want to take each of these little divs. I want to take this chunk of JSX and I'm going to move it into this component so that I can replace all these guys with that component. Okay? So let's get down to it. I need my div, and just like below, you know, we're going to look at the props, but instead of, you know, looking to see if current nav item is das boot, which is, you know, hard coded, that's not what we want. Instead, we're just going to look at a prop called active that we're going to supply and use that to decide if this is the currently active tile. I'm going to push on ahead a little bit, and then, you know, I'm going to finish up this little section here, and then I'm going to talk about it a bit more just to explain what's going on. We have to get a couple of things done before this will actually come to life, and then hopefully it becomes a little more clear what we've done. So I'm going to say div class name equals, and just as we did in the last video, in the last section, I'm going to throw my curly braces in, and this guy's going to need the mcont class. I'm going to put a space so that I can provide another class name if this is the active thumbnail image. Okay, so for that, I'm going to put a plus, and I'm going to look in the props, and I'm going to look for a property we're going to supply, which we're just going to call active. So we're going to say, if active is true in my props, then, you know, apply the mActive class. Otherwise, apply mInactive. All right? And while we're here, let's add our onClick to our click handler. So that click handler, that's that function we've written right up here. Nothing special yet. That's looking pretty good. Let's close out our div, just like that. All right. Looking all right. I think we've got everything in there. That looks pretty good to me. Now inside of here, we can add our image with class name mitem, which is, again, just sizing. And we're going to give it a source that looks like this. Equals, go in the props, and find a prop called background. And as we did in the last step, we're going to give it a data ID, and we're going to set that equal to props.uid. So without thinking of any of the rest of this application, what do we have in our image renderer here? Well, it basically is going to render out a single div with an image inside it, and it's got the ability to look at a prop called active to determine if it should simply add the mActive class to this div. So viewed by itself, it's pretty simple. What does it need? It needs a prop called active. it needs a click handler, which we can add in right now. So when that click happens, we're going to go to props, and we're going to look for a function called click callback or click CV. And just the exact same as we did in the last step, we're going to give it the event target data set ID. All right. So if you're not too clear about that, maybe rewind and look at what we did in the last section here, because we're basically repeating it. This is a functional image render component. Let's use it. So this last step is probably the most complex step, but it's going to result in our code being much, much cleaner and fully dynamic here. We're going to go into the image nav rend, and we're going to replace all of this JSX with a loop that just cranks out however many image rend components we need to get the job done. So I'm going to show you how we do this. Okay, we're gonna lose a lot of code in here, and this is gonna wind up being much, much easier to look at. Now, in order to do this well, you need to know a little bit about object keys, and you need to know a little bit about map. So the first one, object keys, is pretty straightforward. When you call it and you give it an object to look at, it just gives you a little array with all of the keys. So if you remember from when we were looking in the console, the data that we're getting from Firebase, each movie has a key. So it's names like Das Boot, HTTPG, LH, whatever we've called it inside of the database. So when we call object keys on that data, we're just going to get the IDs of the movies. Nice. Once we have that, we can use something called map. So map is a special function of arrays that allows you to go through each item of an array, calling a function on the individual item inside the array. We're going to use these two things in combination to crank out the JSX code that we need to create one of our custom image rend components for every single item that it finds in the data that's coming from the database. That sounds a little bit complex, but we'll do it step by step. Let's go. So I want to insert a loop. I want to insert some JavaScript. So the very first thing I'm going to do in my code here is throw in some curly braces. Okay, step by step. So the first thing, let me call object.keys, and I'm going to call it on props.data. All right? What is props.data? Well, refresh your memory. Props.data is all of the data that came from Firebase. So when I call object keys on it, I'm basically going to get an array that just has the names of the IDs for all of the movies. Now I want to make this loop. So I'm going to say map a function to each of the items that we got from that object keys. Now, I'm going to call each of the items we got data key. And let me make my function that should run on each of those keys. It's going to be a fairly simple function, only one line. It should return an image rend component, just like this, and we need to set its props. Now this is where the magic of this map function comes in. Watch how I do this. We needed the background. In here, I'm going to say, go to the props, go into the data object, look up the key that I'm currently using that I got from the map function, and get its background property. That's our first prop down. What else did we need? Well, looking up here, we needed a background, we need a click callback, and we need an ID. Let's get the click. This one's going to be simpler. So in here we'll say click callback equals, and it's just our click handler. It's our function right here. Pretty straightforward. We need the UID, and we're going to set that to just be the data key. So, we've referred to this data key several times now, and in real terms, data key is just going to be the IDs of the movies. It's what we got from Firebase. So for instance, when we first arrive and it clicks on one of our movies by default, well, that movie has a key that it got out of Firebase, which is just called HTBG. So it's essentially going to loop through all of the keys, so however many movies we have, and crank out one of these image renderers. So here, we're saying, just let that image rend component know that its unique ID is HTBG or Stalker or whatever key we're currently working with. It also needs to know, is this the currently active nav item? So we're going to give it a property called active, and we're going to set this one equal to, and we're going to do a little bit of logic here. We're going to say, is the data key equal to props dot current nav item, just like that. And the good news is those are the only properties needed by each of our image rend components. Okay, so granted, this may look a little weird, but look at how much code we've cut out of here, with the additional benefit that this is now fully 100% dynamic. There's no hard-coded stuff in here anywhere. That means we just turned Firebase essentially into a CMS for this. We can change any of the values of those properties inside Firebase. We can add and remove movies, and this will all just work. And moreover, it'll work in real time, which is beautiful. I'm pretty sure this is in good shape here. I am getting a little tired. It's pretty late in the day right now. Let's give it a run. Let's give it a run and see if we were able to do this. Okay, there's my navigation. Let me try. Now you'll notice that the ordering of these thumbs has changed. And that's a good sign, because that means it is now using the ordering that it's in Firebase, right? If that's true, then that means this is now fully dynamic. So let me try clicking on Das Boot here. Oh, boo. What am I missing? Let me check my console. Cannot read property dataset of undefined. Right. I missed a small change that I can explain fairly easily. Okay, take a look in our image rend, right? So it makes sense to use dataset here, because we have to look at the data ID of this image that we're clicking on. But look what it does. It just calls its callback. And what is that callback? Well, in here, we said, the click callback is equal to click handler. Well, here's click handler. It no longer needs to look at a data set. It's getting the ID it needs from the image rend. So we can change this up a little bit. Let's get rid of this console log here. And we're no longer receiving an event, we're actually receiving the ID we need. We don't have to look up anything. and we pass that along to its parent, which is the data loader. So you see what's happened here? The click is handled first in our little image rend component, which is a really simple, small little component here. This one now gets the ID. It passes it to the click handler of the image navigation renderer, which in turn passes that information up to the data loader. Now in future classes, I'm going to show you how to handle that complexity. We're going to get into using something called Redux, which is a state manager. It's going to allow us to cut down on some of this passing of things through the props here. But for now, it's really good to understand what's going on. So you see what happens. The click originates now in our image renderer, which passes it to its parent, which is the renderer of the whole navigation. It then takes that information and passes it along to the data loader, which can set state that triggers all of the views to refresh themselves. I hope I'm explaining this okay. It can be a little complex the first couple of times you do it, but as you practice this, it will become more straightforward. Let me give this a save and give it a run. Give it a click, and boom, Das Boot. Beautiful. Fully functional. Fully functional, 100% dynamic, fed by Firebase, real-time data, rendered in React. This is sick, guys. This is like some pretty modern shit we're doing here. So I hope you have gotten something good out of this. You guys are fairly new at React, and this is a little bit more complex example. If you found it a little bit hard to follow, well, if you were able to pull a few points out of it, then that's really good. And no worries, we've got plenty of labs that we're going to be going through each of these things we've done in detail. If anything, this is a little bit of a fast forward, but I really appreciated the attempt to do something cool like this. And so I thought it was a good opportunity. I have posted the stages that this got refactored in to the feedback of Chris's submission there. So if you want to look at these stages, compare them to this video, they're there, they're available. Chris has also refactored his example, and he's got it all working very nicely. So you might want to chat with him too. And guys, stick with it. It is worth it to learn this. And as you can see, we can make some pretty fancy stuff. We're just scratching the surface of what's possible. I look forward to, all the labs that we're going to show you. I look forward to seeing your responses to the feedback. Devin, thank you for flagging this one for me, and thank you for your contributions as well. Any questions, hit me up. Okay, guys, I'm going to call it there. That's a pretty long day for Timur. So I will be seeing you guys tomorrow, and check out this video on your leisure. Hopefully I'll make a few more videos like this as I see interesting things come up in the projects that you submit. Thanks for your time.